Leslie Anderchuk here from Alpha Woman. I'm the CEO and co-founder, and I am so happy to have you all here with us today to be joining Aleena Mazhar and myself for this really valuable webinar. So thank you for taking the time to be here. A little bit about Aleena. She is the Managing Director of Experiential at Fuse Marketing. And I'm particularly eager to lean into her 11 years of expertise in experiential marketing as we're going to be discussing building community in the time of a pandemic and how brands can support and come out ahead in these challenging times. We both had a really interesting conversation a week ago, and I know that she's gone away and really taken a lot of her thoughts and a lot of those points that we discussed and created a really dynamic presentation. So I really hope you enjoy it. But before I turn it over to Aleena, I quickly want to tell you a little bit more about Alpha Woman Co. in case you didn't know. We are a media publishing and events company. Our mission is to help women optimize their lives physically, mentally, professionally, and financially. We do that through our various platforms, starting with our digital publication, as you can see here, alphawomanco.com. We also have a podcast that we launched early this year. We interview inspirational alpha woman each week, and we interviewed Aleena, in fact, last week on the Alpha Woman podcast. Her episode is live for your listening pleasure. And Aleena and I had a great conversation, talked about being an entrepreneur, the importance of being a leader, especially in these times, about how Brene Brown has helped her frame up her leadership potential and strategies, and also, of course, the future of experiential marketing. So don't miss it. It's live. Please rate and review after you listen. Really appreciate it. As you know, because you're on one, we also are now producing webinars. And next week, we have a webinar featuring Kirsten Ross, who is the queen of crowdfunding, and she'll be taking us through a lunch and learn on how to select profitable niches, create a wait list, and have sales from day one for your wildly successful crowdfunding campaign, even if it's your first product. So make sure you register for that. Don't miss it. And of course, we do in real life events. Those will be coming up again when we can. And finally, before I throw it over to Aleena, please visit our editorial property, alphawomanco.com, become a subscriber, and follow all things Alpha Woman. Follow us on our social channels. Our handle is @alphawomanco. And of course, for sponsorship opportunities, if you want to reach our audience, please get in touch with me at leslie@alphawomanco.com. First of all, say hi, Aleena. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Can't complain.
Good. Everyone's feeling everyone's got this sort of physical distancing blues this week, I feel.
Yeah, well, I am. I think we're all kind of getting to the point where it's really just getting tired.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really, I'm actually excited to talk about this today because I feel like this is a pretty relevant thing to feel. I mean, we're almost 2 months in, which is just crazy to think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well, I think that,
you want me to kick this off?
Go ahead, please kick it off.
Awesome. Oh, there I am. Perfect. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Leslie. And thanks for that amazing introduction. And also for all of you for taking time to attend this, because I know, there are a lot of webinars out there. So I really appreciate everyone's support and for coming here. Leslie and I had a great conversation last week just on experiential and the evolution of the business. And today, what I'd love to take everybody through and talk about a little bit with you all is how to create community when we physically can't anymore. So within this session, I'm going to go through a few different things. First off, I do want to talk about the importance of community because in our business and as marketers and as human beings, community is a big part of our life. So I want to take you through why. And I'm a bit of a science geek, so to take you through just some science behind it, because I think that'll help give adequate insight as you're building out your own plans. And then I actually want to talk about, on a practical perspective, and as a marketer, how brands can play a supporting role in building community, because it's an important place to be. Of course, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. And at the end, I know this is, going to be a pretty informal presentation, so feel free to jump in and then obviously ask questions at the end if there are any. So let's start talking about why community. What is important about community? And I think to begin with, a really important place to start is the fact that as human beings, we are looking for community. And that comes from the fact that, especially today, this is more relevant today than ever before. We live in this really hyper-connected world. And when we look for connection, we look for one that's deep, we look for one that's authentic, and at the end of the day, meaningful. Meaningful is important. And why is being meaningful important? Because a meaningful connection is one where we as human beings feel that impact on ourselves. And the importance of those meaningful connections within community is this idea of social cohesion. So as we were as we've been building campaigns for our clients and even identifying why we believe in experiential marketing and why we believe in building community, myself specifically, I went into this rabbit hole on social cohesion. And it's a really interesting concept because social cohesion really is an indicator when you measure happiness in countries and which countries are the most socially fulfilled countries around the world. And social cohesion is essentially the combination of community and belonging as well as happiness. And there's sort of a correlation between how much people feel that they belong with a community and how happy they feel. So there is like a direct link and correlation there, which is why if you think of government activity, building community is such a huge part of what governments and organizations are trying to do, because it really enhances that social cohesion. For those of you who are have millennials as a target, which I mean, let's be honest, who doesn't right now? Millennials specifically believe that attending those events actually make them more connected to community. So you can imagine that audience, how much they are struggling right now, where that physical connection doesn't actually exist. Now, the other important component to believe is that, and to know that we are social creatures, that's just what we are, and we have defaulted to this physical expression of community. And there's lots of reasons for that, right? I think coming together and large groups of people coming together for a thing, whether it is for celebration, whether it is for a cause, whether it is for grief, coming together in moments of grief, there is this power in the collective, and I think for those of you all who've experienced the moments in this beautiful page, you've been there, right? You felt it deep within you. And one thing that sort of came back to us is, why do we feel this way? Why is it that the high that you feel when you're at a concert or celebrating with a large group of people, why is that so much deeper and meaningful than what we're experiencing right now when we can't have that? And actually, there is science behind all of this, which I love. I love when there's science behind it. And the science really comes down to the fact that the University of Oxford talks about the social attachment theory of social attachment, which basically says that social interaction, when we're around others, it releases endorphins. And those endorphins actually are similar to the endorphins that you feel when you exercise, which is why I think right now we're all at-home workout experts, or at least I try to be. And those endorphins release happiness within your brain. And so those moments on a scientific perspective, when you're around others and when you're social with a large group, you actually just get more of those endorphins. And also, if you think about it, you're also building memories. So it's something that when you're feeling down, or when you're feeling like you need another hit of that, you kind of go back to the memory of that. And I don't know about you all, but for myself right now, being in this situation, I'm very much I think I posted an Instagram this morning that said living in memories, because that's, you just kind of go back to those moments of when you actually have social interaction. And I think that in comparison, when you think about the endorphins that are released through physical exercise, you are just continuously searching that next hit of endorphins. You don't have the same type of memory that social attachment and social interactions give you. So that makes, if you think through all of that and you think through the science and you think through, how we as humans like to connect and being social creatures, it makes complete sense that this time of hashtag stay home is causing a bit of a challenge to a lot of us. And that comes from the fact that we're just so used to feeling those endorphins and feeling that energy of being around others and creating that physical engagement with other humans. Then not having that is almost like a sort of a piece of you is missing, and your brain is searching for those endorphins. So I think the really important part for us to begin with, as not just marketers, but as human beings, is understanding the empathy of what the toll that COVID actually is having on people. And if you look at, this is a really great piece of research done by IMI. They're doing almost weekly updates to what's happening globally in consumer perspectives. I highly recommend you checking out. I'm happy to provide some more guidance on where to find that if you need. But this is a really interesting study they did at the end of March, so almost a month ago, on the emotional impact of COVID. And if you actually look at the sort of subsections of impact, a lot of them have to do with a lack of physical connection, right? Quarantine, look at some of those words: confinement, imprisonment, isolation, staying calm. If you look at social limitations, that's all about the fact that you're disconnected from community, whether it's family, whether it's places of worship, school, work, looking after people in your lives that you aren't able to connect with. And then the emotional toll, again, loneliness, huge emotional toll. And actually, if you think about social cohesion, the enemy of social cohesion as it relates to, how we as human beings want to live a happy life, the enemy of social cohesion is isolation. That's sort of the other end of the spectrum. So we're in an interesting place where these emotional tolls are really impacting us. And why, as myself being a brand marketer, I think there's a few others on the call, why should we care? Why does this matter to us? Well, I think first and foremost, we know that consumer behavior is a big driving factor of marketing, first off. And really importantly, consumers are demanding that you do something, and consumers are demanding that brands get involved. And I think when you look at how and why, 62% of consumers said that they don't think their country would make it through the crisis without brands playing a critical role. And I think the idea of playing a critical role is so important, because I think all of us think of being critical almost as a tangible response, right? You see so many organizations now shifting their production to create masks or to create PPE or ventilators or whatever it is. I think they're leaning in on a very tangible, functional way. I think one really interesting place for brands to play is a place that we've played for years. And that's the idea of building community. This is a role that many brands have had, since brand marketing really rose. And it's the idea of identifying what your consumer or what your tribe is looking for and helping them and playing a supportive role through that. And I think right now, we know that there's a gap as it relates to community for people. People are looking for ways to connect, looking for ways to actually engage with one another. And it doesn't have to be just with a brand, but with like-minded individuals outside, the person or people they're physically isolated with at home. And I think as marketers, as brand builders, we can make an impact by finding ways to bring people together and still create those human connections and still instill a sense of community around moments that people value. So, big statement, obviously. And I think what I wanted to do through this is actually dive into the how a little bit, because I feel like, um, you know, this is a concept that if you are in marketing or brand marketing, I would assume most of us buy into the fact that we have a responsibility to actually support people during this time. I think where a lot of people are struggling in some of the conversations, at least I've had with people in the industry, is how do we do it? We're so used to, and I think I said this during my podcast last week, as marketers, we're so used to working towards a plan, right? The start, middle, and the end. How to act against that plan and strategy. And now I think we're in a situation where you almost have to park that and put that aside and rethink and reframe and come back to the beginning almost, and think about how you need to change your behavior today for today's need. So how do you do that? Let's start by a really great article from Work. And this came out really early in the COVID crisis. And one line that I've been repeating over and over again to everyone who will listen is, invest in actions, not ads about actions. This is a time in the article it talks about the idea of story acting, not storytelling. As marketers, how much do we talk about storytelling? Storytelling from the lens of your consumer, from your client, from your brand. We are storytellers. We have been since the beginning of time. I think now more than ever, actions speak really loudly, and actions need to be meaningful, and your words need to have actions behind them. And I think there's, for the next little section, before I get into it, I just want to say that I want to talk about how you can make that happen and how it doesn't have to be complicated. I think that's where we sometimes get hung up, again, as people who like to work a plan and work a strategy. I think right now there's an interesting simplicity to the meaningfulness of actions. So with that, I'm just going to pause for a second in case there's, Leslie or anyone has any questions, and I'll just keep going.
I have a question for you, Aleena.
Yeah.
So does the response to brands differ at all by demographics? So, do millennials, for example, or is there research out there on this? Do millennials expect more of their brands than, say, a baby boomer?
That's a really good question. From what we've seen, the expectation is consistent no matter age group. Where we've seen some of the changes and differences are how and how to engage and what people are looking for. So if you look at sort of the millennial demographic, and actually Gen Z has a pretty strong voice in it too, they're looking for action as it relates to, how is the brand that I care about supporting their people, supporting my community, supporting, government even, in actually making change. I think the expectation of support is consistent. I think the level and how they're engaging with brands is very different. And that even comes down to, we'll talk about it a little later, what channels are they engaging with you in? I think that your millennial audience and Gen Z are looking for more, content, snackable content, things to keep them busy. They're looking for more tangible support on a virtual community perspective, versus an older boomer demographic who's not really used to using virtual channels the same way. So their expectations of the type of content and how brands lean in are a bit different. They're looking for things that are a bit more educational. They're looking for things that still connect to community, but it's a lot it's different on how they're connecting.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Great question, though. So maybe I'll go into more sort of strategies and tactics here, and then we can, after this section, we can sort of pause again and keep doing it that way, because that worked really well.
Perfect. Thanks.
No problem. So let's talk about what building community through acts could look like. I always start with my friend. I wish he was my friend. He's not my friend at all. Simon Sinek, who is an incredibly smart and talented man. And when you think about Simon Sinek and his golden circles, we always start with the why. Why are we as a brand looking to do X, or why do we exist during these times? And I think your why is very much tied to your overall brand strategy and your overall brand values. And many brands have already determined sort of their broad, brand purpose / their broad why. I think the role of COVID against that why is to keep yourself in check. I think there is an authentic role a brand can play, and then there's an opportunistic role. And we're going to sort of talk about that opportunistic component in a second. But being authentic to your brand means you're deeply connected to why you're doing what you're doing. And these sort of check-ins that I like to have with my clients through the sort of, I want to say, COVID marketing planning process, because it's different from overall, is just constantly going back to that why. And if there's any disconnect whatsoever, or if people in the room can't answer the why in that moment, you're veering a bit off track. So it's really important that you start with defining your why and then consistently coming back to it. The next component, I mean, this is marketing 101, but I feel like right now it's more relevant than ever. And it is audience segmentation. I think right now this is such an important exercise because we are all experiencing physical distancing very, very differently. We are all, obviously we're dealing with similar challenges as it relates to isolation and as it relates to being disconnected from the world. However, depending on who you are, you've got a very different reality. I look at myself, it's myself, my partner, we don't have kids. For us, we have very different struggles on how to maintain work-life balance, how to stay connected to our family and friends. But, we have time on our hands. So for us, it's dealing with boredom and dealing with sort of the sea of sameness day by day, versus I think of friends of mine who, they've got families, they've got young children, their significant other is an essential worker. They're going through a very different reality as it relates to COVID than I am. So I think the interesting part here as marketers is, being able to segment on a really micro perspective. And remember that right now the way we're building communities through digital channels. So there's the opportunity to be super targeted and super valuable to a smaller group. And it's okay to do more things for smaller segments versus try to do the same thing for everyone on a community building standpoint. So my example to that is, if you're a bank, if you're a financial service institution, obviously you service many, many different clients. You have a really wide audience. It's okay to be very targeted with personal messages and personal moments of community building to specific people. Myself, who's at home, I have a mortgage, a lot about me and you know what my challenges may be, versus someone who's a student going through a very different life stage and very different challenges. So I think there's the opportunity for someone with a wide audience like a bank to micro segment and come out with specific moments of community for specific people and be okay with that. I think for a long time on a measurement perspective, we've worked on these, big awareness campaigns. So we're so used to, how many millions of people saw this one TV ad. And I think when it comes to drilling it down to acts against microsegments, you're probably doing it for less people, though virtually, I think that's expanded your reach already from what that physical experience would be. You're doing it for less people. However, what you're measuring is how meaningful that act was for those people and how valuable it was and what it did and how engaged they were through whatever that act is. I think then if you compare that to a product that's family oriented, like a Lego as a great example, I think their approach can be really different. They can be hyper targeted to families and hyper targeted to challenges that families are having as a micro audience and sort of build content and community campaigns just for that audience. The second piece to this is what Reddit, who is leader in defining culture, in my perspective, Reddit's defining this as the culture of quarantine, and the unique needs of each of us. And I think, again, this is where personalization comes in, where the unique needs look different. Some of the top things that people on Reddit are talking about is cooking, and there's banana bread for recipe for every day for people who aren't me, because I do not bake, at home entertainment, and children's education. I mean, how many of you all are now suddenly teachers and at home educators? So I think these are sort of key content themes that Reddit's calling out, but I think this is where, as marketers, you can take it one step further and identify those culture of quarantine style values that your micro audience is leaning into. And we've got a few examples of brands that have done a really good job at that. So again, the goal of this presentation was simplicity. Like, that's my favorite word right now. And in a very simple form, the key is to listen to your audiences, there's lots of ways to do that, through social listening, through, some light research. Just listen to identify your audiences, listen to what they want, and then do acts that they will care about. Then there's a whole bunch of marketing stuff that happens after that you guys are, for those of you who are in brand marketing, are probably pretty used to, whether it's like what channels are you using? How are you engaging with them? There's a really interesting marriage between the virtual world and engaging with them physically using direct mail, resurgence of direct mail. How many of us are getting packages delivered? How do you marry those two worlds together? But I think it comes down to consistency, frequency, and quality. Is it consistent enough that people take notice? And is it good enough quality? And by quality, I don't mean like beautifully produced television, but does it actually add value to my life as a consumer, or as a client, or as someone within your audiences? And finally, it's not about you as a brand, right? Oh, sorry, it went too far. It's not about you as a brand right now. It's about them. And this is where being opportunistic comes in. Communication really must be in context of a larger social good. And I think it's easy. The line is fine right now, right? I think it's really fine to go. It's easy to move from, I'm trying to help someone, to suddenly, you've got product throughout your ad, or it feels like an ad, it doesn't feel like an act, and it feels like blatant self-promotion. So the line is pretty, and it's ever evolving, it's ever moving, and honestly, it's different for every category. We have a big financial services client, and I feel for the big banks right now. The expectations of financial services, especially here in Canada, is we have high expectation, and every move is being very critically looked at as a client and a consumer, because our money is tied into that. So it's a very emotional relationship right now. So I think it's different by category, it's different by type of communication, but I think at the end of the day, if you follow these sort of two steps, which is belonging by showing some kind of guidance to people, what is the value that you're adding in that conversation, or with that community, or in that piece of content, and then making sure it's in context of a larger social good. And that again ties back to your why. And I think if you're able to connect those dots, it will feel authentic for your brand. I have some examples here which I wanted to go into to make this feel practical, because I want this to feel like something practical that you can take away. For those of you who sort of work in the industry, I feel like there's a lot of theory out there. I'm trying to drill it down to being practical, because speed is of the essence right now. But before I did, Leslie, is there anything you wanted to ask on previous, or do you want me to keep going?
Just a quick question, Aleena, about measurement. So, as marketers, we're always wanting to put KPIs in there and make sure we measure our ROI. And this is such a unique time and unique sort of challenge for marketers. I guess my question is, is measurement, I'm going to say this, I'm sure a lot of marketers will go, you're crazy to say this, but is measurement necessary, A? be, what do you think the right KPI to measure is?
Great question. Honestly, we've been having I've read a lot of articles on measurement, and there's different varying opinions. There are people that have come out, and pretty well-known marketers that have come out and said, ignore measurement right now.
Yeah.
Because, and this is a perspective of one, and this is very much my perspective, so I have to caveat that before I say this.
Mhm.
My perspective is that the reason why I feel like a lot of marketers are saying ignore measurement is because the way we measure feels so antiquated sometimes. It's built on ROI that we measure for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it very rarely is, especially in some of the big organizations, it's hard to be flexible, right? It's hard because the way we align on corporate measurement, it is so time consuming that it almost feels like if you start measurement first, we're going to miss the boat.
Right.
It's going to be next year and we haven't done anything yet.
Good point.
So I feel like that's why a lot of marketers are saying, guys, just pause on the measurement for a second and act. And then, I use the language just today with a client of looking at it in an iterative way versus put it all or nothing. We're so used to, as marketers, everything being perfect, our brand plan being perfect. You've like crossed all the T's and you connected the dots and this connects to that. And like, there was this like master, blueprint that nobody really understands. Like that's just how we logically operate. And I think right now, because speed is so important, you almost have to rewrite that. And for some organizations, if it's easier to rewrite that by saying, okay, we're just going to ignore this for 5 minutes. We're going to act. And here are the 2 or 3 things we're going to measure for this campaign today to measure success. And I think that's a good way to do it. I'm a big, believer in KPIs. I believe without objectives, what's the point? Why are you doing what you're doing? So I do think objectives are important, but I think if you can compartmentalize that and almost create objectives that are iterative based on where we are in the life cycle of COVID life, I think that's an easier way to get things out the door quickly.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks, Aleena.
No problem. So I have a few examples here, and then my talking part of the presentation is done, and we can open this up for some questions. And what I wanted to do is provide a few examples, and I'll tell you, and really I wanted to tie it back to, I'll give you a little tidbit as to why I've picked these examples. And I've put these in different categories based on what I'm seeing on a trend perspective on how brands are leaning in. I wanted to start with wellness. I think when it comes to creating community, mental health and physical wellness is such a natural space, an easy space, a space where we're yearning for help, and also connects very closely to the idea of endorphins, right? And if you think of like what we're getting out of working out at home, it is those endorphins. So I've got a whole bunch of examples here, and of course I stole them from the internet, as you can see. So if you're interested in learning more, just go to their Instagram pages. They're not hidden. I wanted to call out 2 because we don't have time to go through everything. The first one I wanted to call out is Headspace. Incredible meditation app, very popular pre-COVID. COVID hits. Obviously, this isn't mental health and anxiety management, and staying calm is a big area where people are sort of looking for content and support. So Headspace leans right in. And they're doing a series called Take 10, where they're encouraging people to every single day take 10 minutes of their day. 5 of those minutes is a guided meditation. 5 of those minutes is sort of positive messaging and positive, just like a few positive words with various people. And if you look, this is sort of your right-hand side of the screen, you can see that those people vary from Chelsea Handler, to who's a comedian, to authors, to doctors. It's a wide array of people that they feature. And this goes with, if you think about it strategically, they have a wide audience, they want to appeal to everybody, but it really comes back to their sort of already existing purpose of take 10 minutes of your day for yourself. Now they're just taking it one step further to really encourage participation and building community with people who, instead of doing it alone, because it is a very solo experience, actually meditating with a larger group. I don't know if any of you have tried it yet. It is an incredibly healing experience because you feel like you're not in it alone. So they've built this incredible community. And look at the people that they've got attending these Take 10 talks. It's pretty incredible. So I would highly recommend just checking that out. The second one I wanted to call out is Michelob Ultra. It's a light beer. What I find really interesting about this campaign is that this is actually a physical campaign that they do, and that what they've essentially done is they've taken their physical strategy, and made it virtual. So their physical strategy, their experiential strategy is they're the happy hour beer. So they're low-cal. I don't know how low-cal, they're still pretty carb-loaded, guys, so it's still a beer. But it is low calorie. It's for someone who, likes to work out, but also likes to have a good time with their friends. And so what their experiential strategy is that they partner with small studios and fitness, different fitness influencers and different workout studios across the United States, and they host happy hour. So you do your run, you do your CrossFit, you do your yoga, and then they've got beer for everyone, and they're doing a happy hour afterwards. They've essentially partnered with those exact same people and made that a virtual experience. And it's really interesting because in order to get participation, for people who participate, you have the option to donate to a food bank, and Michelob Ultra matches donations. So what they've done an amazing job at is just taking a model that they already have that works, relationships that they already have that works, translating that to a digital environment, connecting the dots for everybody. If I think of a small studio like Y7 Yoga Studio, who just did an incredible virtual live stream with Diplo, who is DJing, one of the top DJs in the world, where Diplo's doing yoga with Y7. That's a pretty crazy initiative. And then after that, Diplo's spinning, everyone's drinking a beer, having a good time, and you're giving back to charity. Check marks across the board as far as creating virtual community. The next one I wanted to talk about is adapting and innovating, and this is sort of props to food service. They've done an incredible job, and there's two examples I wanted to point out here, and the first one is a big chain. The second one is a really small local. So you can see a wide array. And what the important part here that I want you to think about strategically is how to solve a business problem, and how different both food service, but how different their business problems are. If you think about Earl's, one of the biggest chains in Canada, their business problem, of course, is the fact that their chains are empty. Like, that's a pretty big business problem. But also, they've got all of these ingredients. Being a chain, you've already committed to your supply chain. You've committed to your food vendors. You've committed to all of those farmers that are sending you produce. And they're sending you a lot of it, and those contracts are committed to months in advance. Now, think about COVID, no one's showing up into your restaurants, and think about the impacts of canceling those contracts on our economy, on farmers, on the logistics chain, on, all of their vendors. So what they've done is they've, completely changed their model to being grocery vendors and making it easy for people in their community to get groceries, as well as giving, kits to some of their favorite either moments, like you see a brunch kit where you can get a mimosa kit, which sounds pretty freaking good, but also some of their best recipes. You can actually just get a kit with those recipes and the recipes, so you can go home and cook it. Really incredible solve to a business problem, solved, taps into something, a trend that's happening with at-home cooking, keeps the restaurant top of mind, makes it easy for people, and makes sure that they don't cancel all those contracts, which, just think of it as, on an economic standpoint, good on them. So that's an amazing way to innovate. And who knows, maybe that'll turn into a long-term innovation for them and how they approach connecting with consumers. The other one is a really small restaurant. It's a local mom and pop in my neighborhood, called Michael Kelly's. And what they're doing is, they're a big family restaurant. So on the weekends, it's all family. You've got board games and stuff. Families spend a lot of time there. The big brunch place too. And so what they're doing for families in our community is, they're doing a special weekend food and fun where you call them, you tell them a little bit about yourself and your family, and they create an at-home sort of party pack that shows up at your house, with a handwritten note, obviously your food, but also, they send you a game, and the games are different. They don't tell you what it is. It's just packed for you, and they send you a 90-minute YouTube playlist for you to play, and you've sort of created your own Michael Kelly's party at home. So very micro example, but a great way to keep their specific community engaged and keep them top of mind when, people aren't ordering in as much, and at the same time, there's a lot of choice. You want to support local, but there's a lot of local to support. And then finally, supporting your community. So, we talked about making this about the consumer. We talked about social good and brands in the context of social good. So I'm going to fly through a few examples here. The first one, I've already talked to them in the beer category, and I want to say AB InBev, the owner of sort of Bud Light, they're doing an incredible job right now. They switched their strategy very quickly. They changed how they're spending money really quickly, and they've identified the role of each brand in their category really quickly. So you look at Budweiser, they pulled their sponsorship activation dollars and put them against causes that their partners and sponsors support. Incredible. If you look at Bud Light, they've taken their dive bar tour, which is a small experiential music program, and they've brought it to the virtual space where they're still giving people that intimate experience, but it's on a virtual perspective through Instagram. That was a really quick turnaround. And then they've also done a partnership with restaurants across North America where they can register to be open for takeout, which means people can actually go into their sort of zip code and see all the different restaurants that are open for takeout, and they're offering discounts with those restaurants to keep them alive, because they're really into sort of the dive bar local scene. And the final one I wanted to talk to you guys about is my current obsession. He's a man named Ryan Reynolds, and I've been talking about him a lot lately because I don't know if you know this, but he's emerged. He should be the marketer of the year this year, sort of. That's my perspective. He's emerged as an incredible brand builder. His team around him is just on it. And to be honest, especially as a Canadian, I'm so proud of how Canada-centric some of his cause work is right now, because he's supporting food banks across Canada. He gave a big donation to an Edmonton food bank. He's very sort of micro community in Canada while giving us a really global voice. And I love that. And sort of the three examples from my obsession with Ryan Reynolds that I'd like to talk about. The first one is Mint Mobile, which is, I don't know if you knew this, he owns a phone company in the US. Week one, he basically said, okay, guys, data caps are gone. Use as much data as you want. You're working from home now. Don't stress about it. And he actually left voicemails at people's phones telling them that. Just imagine getting a voicemail from Ryan Reynolds. I think I would die. The second one is Aviator Gin, great gin. And what Aviator Gin is doing is providing 30%, I believe it's 30% of all their sales. Proceeds are going to bartender guilds, in the US, in Canada, and in the UK, which is sort of the three countries they're in order as a tip for bartenders. So to keep sort of the bartender, the service industry has just been killed by this, especially bartending and bartenders. So this is sort of to help that sort of tribe of people stay alive and well, and to go against some of the things that they need. Again, incredible. Again, very big in scale, but very local in execution. And then the final thing, which he's doing right now, and I strongly suggest everybody check this out because it's an incredible use of future experiential for gain today, is what is called the All-In Challenge. And he's doing this with Hugh Jackman, another, pretty well-known superstar. And the two of them have this hilarious feud going on the internet, which is just a day of boredom. If you're bored, just deep dive into that, because that's also a really interesting, funny thing to watch. But they've come together to offer experiences to people for donation. So you bid on, it's like basically a virtual charity fundraiser where you bid on experiences, and all the money that you get, that you bid, the highest bidder, all that money goes to charity. And you look to the right, look at those experiences. They're pretty incredible. A walk on a roll in a Scorsese film with DiCaprio and De Niro, run a lemonade stand with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. So OVO experience, fly on Air Drake, party in LA, and score tickets to Drizzy's show. Some pretty big ticket experiences here, but he's sort of, rallied the celeb community to create something bigger than himself that gives back, but also is very experiential. So I'm not saying, get DiCaprio to fundraise for your charity, but I'm saying there's some really interesting ways to look future forward while still doing something today. And with that, I just wanted to wrap up with a few thought starters, and then I'll open it up because I see sort of the chat is ringing a little bit right now too, and I've been talking for a really long time. So thinking future forward, where to from here? We're working on what's next, and we're working on, how experiences continue to evolve, how we connect continues to evolve. And so the three things I'd like to leave you with, and just some food for thought, is things are going to consistently evolve and change. And it's really based on what's acceptable, how societies open up, how communities open up. And there isn't a one size fits all answer. Even if you look at Canada, communities are opening at different rates and in different ways. So I think as a brand, you've just got to look at a consistent evolutionary process that's iterative and that continuously evolves based on what's acceptable. The second thing is really making it audience first. How do our lifestyles continue to change? And in every few months or every month or every few weeks, looking back at that and making sure that as a brand, you're adding value to how those changes continuously happen. And thinking it through and thinking about ways you can authentically fit in. This isn't, a build, plan once, walk away until measurement time. This is a continuously, have a look at it over and over again to be iterative. And then finally, what an interesting and unique time to be a brand marketer, right? Our society is changing in front of our eyes. Consumer behavior is changing in front of our eyes. So what an incredible opportunity for reinvention and reimagination. This is what, we crave being in marketing, to think about what's next and to, really spend some time in the creative space. So I think this is such a huge opportunity. And I've written where strategy and innovation meet action. And action is so important. I think there are going to be a lot of people that are just stuck in strategy for a long time. And I think in order to reinvent, reimagine, and make that a consistent iterative process, you've almost got to shorten that cycle, come to it more often, and act, and make it iterative. And I think this is the time to do that. And I feel like you may hit a nugget and it could change what your next 12 months as a brand looks like. But what an interesting and exciting time to be in the roles that we're in.
Thank you, Aleena.
Thank you.
So, quick question.
Yes.
Do you think that the COVID situation will permanently change what consumers expect from brands and demand from brands?
Great question. So I think, we're looking at a lot of research on that right now as we look at the next 12 months for our brand partners. And I would say in some cases, things will change a lot. You know, I think in some cases, in some industries that are going through incredible reimagination, I think of retail where, you know, a lot of big corporations have leaned digital very quickly. You know, I think of how we're leaning into click and collect so intensely, and how, you know, the way we shop for essentials, what is it? It's at 90 days to build a habit, something like that, 30
Right.
to, and we're almost at 2 months already of
Yeah.
doing this. So I think we're building different habits and rituals right now, which will impact industries like retail. You'll have industries like sponsorship that will have be forced to evolve because
Mhm.
of the realities of crowd control and having lots of people in one place and travel restrictions. So there are industries that will be forced to reimagine for the foreseeable future. I
Mhm.
think, though, what may not change as much is, my perspective, is some of our overall expectations as human beings. I
Mhm.
think we're going to want to connect. We're going to want to go to restaurants and bars. We're going to want to go see live sports. We're
Yeah.
going to want to go see live music. I think those innate needs and wants and behaviors of ours will exist. However, I think how that happens will have a sort of an iterative process in the next 12 months. So I
Mm.
think it's going to be sort of a slow and steady game. And I think those people and brands and properties that can be open to that and open to that continuous reimagination, I think it will pay off for them. And I do think that I don't personally think that it will, you know, there's some big statements out there that this will change the world forever and ever and
Mm.
ever.
Mm.
I'm not really buying into the fact that it's going to be this like revolution. This isn't the industrial age here. Like I'm not really there with everybody. However, I am in a place where I think it will force industries that haven't changed for a while to really rethink their model and evolve how they work.
Right. Now we have a question from Anastasia. You talk about brands building an iterative approach to brand planning. Do you
Mm.
think this is just something brands should adopt for the near future? Because we don't know how COVID-19 will impact things in the next 12 to 24 months. Or do you think this should just be the way brand planning evolves? Period.
That's a really, really great
Great
question.
question. Yeah.
For me, I believe brand planning should evolve to be
Mm.
more iterative and flexible and nimble and agile. I think that it allows for a lot more test and learn. It allows for us to continuously try new things. And it's a great approach for innovation. You know,
Right.
I for a lot of organizations are looking for ways to be more innovative. They're looking for ways to continuously add value. And this is a great way to test a new approach and maintain it long term. So that
Mm-hmm.
is my personal perspective. I think it's hard for a lot of brands to think that way because I think they're really tied into their long-term strategies. So I think what our challenge is going to be is those people who act on behalf of brands, no matter what our role, is going to be to figure out how to map that back to long-term goals and objectives and long-term strategies, because I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I think that
Mm.
there's a way to still do long-range planning and still have that long-range goal while creating a process that is iterative. And depending on the brand, for some brands, iterative may mean weekly. You know, for some brands, it may mean quarterly. It may mean something different for your brand, and that's okay too. I think it's just defining what iterative means for you.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so very much, Aleena. I think we don't have any more questions, and this has just been a fantastic hour that you've spent with us and such valuable information. I want to thank all of you, obviously, for being here today and for taking the time. I hope it was valuable. And we will be sending out a video of the presentation in the next few days. So you'll have all of the information and Aleena's information as well. And once again, I want to thank you all. Stay safe and healthy. And please do join us next Tuesday. Take care.